we just arrived at SmileFM, very excited, and we are about to go into the lift. So let's get this interview on the roll.
On Smile.
9:30, a very good evening if you've just joined us. Monday evenings on Smile 90.4 FM. It's Inspirational Hour with Andre du Toit. Andre, the big positive guy. We heard earlier from Stan Miller and Cindy de Villiers together with Glynis Depper from Lifeline about a wonderful event happening on Saturday. A cycle marathon all in aid of Lifeline and also to increase the awareness around mental health. Andre?
It's quite a good cause.
It is.
Speaking about good causes, one of the things that I absolutely love about Cape Town is the number of people that are involved in trying to make the society better. And joining us now is Dr. Shaun Adendorff. Hello, Shaun. And you're not used to me calling you doctor?
No, not at all.
You're very welcome in the studio. And Juanita Aitkenhead.
Thank you, Andre.
You guys are going to have to get a lot closer to that microphone.
There we go.
There we
Can
go.
you hear me?
What happens, you guys represent an organisation called the Animal Rescue Rehabilitation Organisation. Now, immediately when I see that, I say another charity organisation for animals. Is it possible that we can have another one? But it's something completely different. Do you want to just tell me how you got involved with it and a little bit about it, Shaun?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a partner in an architectural firm, and what happened was I just finished the Fugard Theatre, and one of the main contractors was sitting on the board of the SPCA and said, look, we desperately need somebody to come in and think out the box and design a building that is international standard, meets all these requirements, but currently what people are designing just isn't working. And I think the biggest challenge that I found was that there was hardly any information out there. There was very little documented protocol systems of how you should design correctly. There's actually even very little photographs of good designed shelters, and there's a lot of those horrific shots out there. So it was a big challenge, but it was also a massive learning curve. So I pulled on resources, phoned people internationally, looked at the documentation that I could find, and then I started looking at hospitals and veterinary clinics to pull inspiration, and eventually was looking at prison architecture, because that's the closest that you associate with the animal welfare. But what I did was I looked at more like the Scandinavian prisons, because they're more like hotels, and the convicts that come out of there have actually got a really good rehabilitation kind of thing. And I was saying, well, surely this kind of philosophy could apply to animals as well, because they're part of our society. People love them as humans, little humans. So I was saying, okay, well, let's take some of those principles and apply them. And what was interesting by taking some of the simple things that a lot of organizations don't know of, numbers that come in, and the numbers that come in must match the numbers that go out, so you don't get overcrowding. How you design something that you don't have operational expenses that increase and that you cannot keep up with. So you had to look at the number of handlers versus the number of animals.
So Shaun, you're looking at it from a completely different angle. We're not looking at the warm and fuzzies, we're not looking after animals, we're not going to rescue cats and dogs and things like that. You're actually looking
at the science.
At the actually science behind it, and how do the actual animal shelters run?
Yeah.
And is there a better way to run this?
Absolutely, because I think that's the biggest thing, is that you've got all these people that are passionate, they love what they do, but they get involved because they love animals, but they don't know how to actually run a shelter. And so what we're looking at is some of those simple principles can really make a difference. With the SPCA, we reduced animal stress by 70%. We increased the adoption rates by 3-4-fold.
You mentioned the SPCA, your involvement with the SPCA?
We did at the flagship Grassy Park SPCA. We won a couple of awards for that. We've subsequently done another one out in Fultra for them. And from that association, Juanita phoned me up and said, hey, look, I can see you guys are doing some stuff, thinking out the box. We're starting the ARRO organization, and we'd love you to be involved, because we desperately need people that can help organizations and get that knowledge out there so that we can make a difference.
That's a lovely intro for you, Juanita. I've known you for years. I don't know what to call you, but I think I should call you an animal activist, because you've always been involved with animal charities at some stage or other. How did you come across this idea? Tell me about how it initiated.
Thank you, Andre, for giving us an opportunity to be here today. Basically, my experience growing up on the banks of the Olifants River next to the Kruger National Park, I spent a lot of time with animals and nature, and it just came naturally that it is what my calling is. And then I found that to actually help animals, we need to help the people. So I did a lot of research, and I went to visit a lot of animal shelters. And with the research and my findings, I decided that the time has come that we need to actually start helping the people that are running the animal shelters more than, trying to help the animals. Because I believe that if we can help the people who can help their communities, the knock-off effect will be a greater benefit for the animals as well.
There's a family that loves animals as well and has got involved with many charities. I don't think we're talking about all charities. There's some charities that are running fantastically well and are exceptionally well organized, but there are also so many out there in the field that are little more than squatter camps. Let's call it what it is. And the constructions and the number of animals are astronomical. Shaun, do you want to tell me, how can you make that better? I mean, I've got and I think the one that we looked at had 1,000 animals.
Yeah, so what you've got is you've got a lot of people wanting to take animals in, rescue them, etc. And the problem is that you've got all these animals coming in. Some of them, a lot of the organizations don't believe in animals being put down, etc. So if the animal's not adoptable, they keep them, so they become lifers. And what's happening is that you've got all these organizations that are literally have one pen, maybe two pens, inefficient kind of coverings for the animals, etc. And what we're looking at is saying, how can we create a very kind of modular Lego block system that's plug and play? And depending on the funds, depending on what's available, we can actually create an organization that can grow with that organization. So these structures are basically shipping containers that we are converting, and they're different pods, if that's what we want to call it. We've got to start off with, let's call a veterinary kind of pod, and that's the kind of first need that I think Juanita will allude to. But it's where an animal's coming in, we need to assess it, etc. From there, we would create a quarantine pod. And that's critical because the animals come in, they might have diseases, they might be traumatized, etc. And so they'll go into a holding cycle of, let's say, for 10 days. Then they'll go into pre-adoption, where they get associated back in with other animals. That's where they get assessed, etc. And then they go into the adoption cycle, and that's another facility. And each one of these facilities would have handlers. They would be geared to numbers, so you do those ratios and the scientific things to work out how many dogs come in, how many dogs go out, how many handlers you can handle per animal, etc. But there are ratios and international standards that you will apply to each facility. And by giving them this foundation and giving them these guides, whether it's just a handbook and a step-by-step guide on how you grow, to having a whole lot of millions coming in and saying, let's build a structure for you, let's build and revamp you. Those are the kind of things that we're looking at. Is we can go and assess facilities that are up and running, that are first world, that are doing things right but maybe need a bit of tweaking, to grassroots squatter kind of organizations where we can physically go in and build stuff for them and guide them and train them.
But now they've got no money. So Juanita, where's all this money coming from?
Andre, for ARRO, we are looking at trying to get international funders, big corporates, people that would like to get exposure on a national footprint. We do not want to hijack current sponsors and funders of current organizations. So if there are people out there that want to support our organization, we definitely don't want them to take away the funding that they are currently giving to set organizations. We'd rather say complement us with an extra funding, or people who have not funded animal organizations and would like to really to take a look at what we have to offer and consider supporting us.
I've been very fortunate enough, Benito, to see some of these modular units at work, and it's actually quite amazing. And I think many of these modular units can actually help animal rescue organizations to actually achieve more income.
It sounds like it just streamlines the entire operation.
It's like really, it's going from really third world scenario to something the best in the world practice. So Shaun, maybe just shoot at a couple of those things. I mean, you mentioned a veterinary pod.
So there's a veterinary pod. Then we would design.
So what would a veterinary pod be like?
So a veterinary pod, well, there'll be two parts. There'll be like the consulting areas and the actual.
If they obviously have a vet on call or vet there.
So you mentioned about how funding works, etc. But there's a whole lot of things that can happen. So I was saying earlier that you've got money, which is one thing, but you also need people to help you in a whole number of platforms. So just being in this radio station helps. And supports and gets the word out there, but you've got a whole lot of volunteers. We donating our time as architects to assist and build these things. But if you take the vets, you've got a whole lot of graduates that are coming out now that need to do their year internship. Now, if you had government buy-in, you could say, okay, well, we can create these veterinary hospitals and then place an intern there, and they can make a difference in that community.
That's excellent, yes.
Yeah, so that's the first initiative, is if we can roll out a veterinary pod in each of these major city centres, and a lot of these places don't even have that would make an immense difference just to the animals in that society. Then the next pod that we would add is probably the quarantine pod. That's where the animals will go into to be housed until they go into probably the existing pens that are there now. And that's probably, I would say, probably 20 kennels. Okay, and of that 20, a container would be 6 kennels. And what we'd also have is we'd have a handlers area. Those handlers areas, each of those pods have an accommodation wing. And what we found was that a lot of the people that are involved in these are so passionate that they actually would prefer to sleep in the kennels than sleep in their own homes, because they find that the dogs are traumatized, they want to keep the dogs company, etc. So they end up sleeping in the kennels. So we're saying, well, what we can do is we can provide that accommodation there with the kennels, and if you've got volunteers, that becomes their home. So these pods grow, and then they basically, the modular system is this kind of band-aid cross, if you can imagine. So it's in a cross shape, and you've got 3 arms that spiral out from that, which would have the kennels, and the fourth line is the residential wing, and from that they go out into their own little holding pens outside, so the dogs get to play, and depending on whether they socialize and they're in the pre-adoption or adoption phases, that's where they can intermingle with other dogs. But if they're in the quarantine, they'd have their own runs. So it still means that they're not just trapped in a cage all day. They've actually got secured, safe spaces that they can play in as well.
It sounds absolutely amazing. Juanita, obviously animal care is very often about people care as well.
Yes.
So I love that thing where you're saying that the handlers, it actually provides employment, number one.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It provides sometimes accommodation,
Yeah.
and it's doing it in a much more civilized manner than rather just a little couple of wire hawkies,
Yeah.
which are some of the places that I've seen.
Andre, yes, absolutely. We want to make the ARRO accredited shelters attractive to international volunteers that are preferably paying to come and work in South Africa. They can pay the animal shelter, and they can then have a decent accommodation facility, bring their first world skills to South Africa, and assist the animal world with that kind of environment. What's also very good that Shaun didn't mention is with the pod style that he has developed, it's an all-weather system. So now the animals can be fed, medicated and handled in any weather condition, because everything will be done under one roof.
How many of these shelters are you hoping to build?
Andre, you know what? As soon as we've built our first one, which is on the outskirts of Melkbos Strand on the west coast here in the Cape, we believe it will probably take us, from the moment we start getting our funding, it'll take us 6 months to finalize the project, another 3 months to just work out all the snags, and then from there I believe that once people find trust in what we're going to be doing and the funding starts coming in, we could probably build at least one shelter every 3 to 4 months.
You've met my wife. My wife cannot go and work with the animals. It just doesn't work.
Well, you come home with like 6
She can do a million other things, but one of the things that she's found that she's very good at is raising awareness and creating an environment where people come into the organization. Do you have a need for people like that? Do you have a need for any volunteers or anything? I mean, if you're going to be doing this very fancy building operation, what do we need volunteers for?
Andre, thank you for the question. Yes, we definitely need people out there that would be able to assist us in either just promoting the message, getting the message out there. So if you are an individual that has a good following, or you are passionate about animals and you struggle to actually work directly with the animals, please can you come on board, because this project, you don't necessarily will be working with the animals if you don't want to, but you definitely will be filling a need in terms of helping the voiceless.
Shaun, the only negative thing about radio is that people can't see the plans which I've seen. And Benito, there's some of the most incredible 3D renderings of what actually can be done to make an animal shelter a place not of luxury, but that there's human dignity and animal dignity at the same time.
Just listening to Shaun describe it in the sort of pod style development, I mean, I can just imagine that's going to be such a difference.
And it can be rolled out so quickly.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I absolutely adore is what you've done. Is there any place where the people out there can go see it? Is it on the website or?
It will be up on the ARRO website, so you can go onto the ARRO website and have a look at it. So there are all the schematics there, etc. And the proof will be in the pudding when we actually build one of these. But I can say that you mentioned how do we start getting this to really work, and the visions of how this can roll out into the rest of South Africa, into the rest of Africa, and maybe even internationally across, because it's the plug and play module. And the other thing is that, if you can just get people to buy into it and you build a lovely facility, people want to go there. That's when the adoption rates go up, and that's when you know it's really working. One of the initiatives that we've spoken about is saying, well, if you can get like Run Walk for Life, buying into this, they don't necessarily have to be contributing, but what they do is, instead of walking down the road, they take the dogs for a walk and they do circuits around the complex. And so all of a sudden, each one of us as individuals doing what we normally do can make a huge difference. And architects can do stuff, but the average person listening to the station can do stuff, whether it's volunteering time, whether it's contributing some money, whether it's saying, I want to be part of ARRO and how can I contribute, and whether that's saying, well, I want to also fund you, I want to be a brand ambassador. There are a number of ways that people can help and make a difference here.
I'm quite excited by this initiative. I think there's some amazing organisations out there, and I've been privileged to work with several of them across the Western Cape. This is something different. This is something, and I really, really wish you well. If you could get this right, really, it might just change the way that we do animal shelters into the future, not only for South Africa, but I would guess for many places around the world as well. Wow. So Juanita, thank you very much. Is there any place that people can contact you guys, or where can they find you?
Yes, thank you, Andre. It's on our website, www.arro.org.za, or on Facebook. They're welcome to contact us, and we'll be glad to give them more information.
Fantastic. Those 3D renderings that I see, is there any chance we can put those on the website or the Facebook,
sure,
even if it's just a photograph of it?
We'll put some
I think if you really want to see something amazing about what a shelter can look like into the future, go look at that. So thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Shaun, and thank you, Juanita, for coming in.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Best thing on a Monday. BOGO Mondays at the Cross. Buy one, get one.